Hello and welcome to Psychgeist, where we talk about the psychology of the era, the science of games. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Kowert, and on today's episode of Research Review, we're going to be reviewing a 2020 article entitled Reducing Mental Health Stigma Through Identification with Video Game Avatars and Mental Illness. This study explores how playing an in-game character with a mental illness can impact real-world stigma relating to mental health. Previous research has found that interacting with media that show non-stigmatizing messages relating to mental health can change real-world thoughts and behaviors towards those with mental health challenges. The researchers argue that video games might be uniquely positioned to deepen the connection with characters that exhibit mental illness by placing the player directly into the body of that character, and thus have a greater impact on destigmatizing thoughts and behaviors related to mental health and mental illness. Rather than simply observing a character with a mental illness, the player becomes that character, feels their feelings, and has their thoughts, experiences the life through the character's eyes. The present study used an experimental design to examine how experiencing mental illness through the character in a video game narrative can impact mental health stigma, specifically through two mechanisms, transportation and identification. Transportation is the narrative engagement, the extent to which the player can disengage from the real world and be transported into the game world. Research has found that transportation is an effective mechanism for creating attitude change and therefore is a useful concept to explore here. The other component here is identification, which is the extent to which the player takes on the thoughts and perspectives of the character. The authors hypothesized that interactive gameplay would predict positive transportation into the story world, that transportation would predict identification with the main character, and the identification is what would reduce mental health stigma. Specifically, they predicted a reduction in stereotyping and a reduction in a participant's desire to socially distance from people with mental illness. 198 participants, university students, completed this experimental study, and they ranged in age from 18 to 35. As the study was experimental, there were two design conditions, either in the treatment condition or the control condition. In the treatment condition, participants played 45 minutes of the game Hellblade's Senua Sacrifice. In the control condition, the participants watched somebody else play the first 45 minutes of the same game. Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice was chosen as the game of interest because it is universally praised for its accurate portrayal of psychosis. The main character, Senua, suffers from psychosis, and the player must navigate her along her quest for mental health. As described by the authors, set in an age of Vikings, Hellblade follows the title character, Senua, on a vision quest. Developed along with neuroscientists and those who experience psychosis, Hellblade places depictions of mental health issues centrally in its story as Senua battles for the soul of her departed lover. Senua herself suffers from psychosis and must contend with her own mental illness along with the challenges presented by her quest. Hellblade has been recognized for these depictions, winning a BAFTA Award for Game Beyond Entertainment and a The Games Prize Award for Games for Impact. Hellblade was designed in conjunction with noted neuroscientists and mental health experts and people suffering from psychosis with the express intention of creating an accurate and respectful depiction of the types of hallucinations common to those suffering from psychosis. Pretty sweet game. You should check it out if you haven't played it before. After either playing or watching others play, the participants completed several questionnaires. First, two aspects of mental health stigma were assessed using adapted validated scales. The first measured the degree to which they stereotype individuals with mental illness. This included items such as, quote, those with mental illness are to blame for their own problems. The second measured their desire for social distance for those with mental illness, including items such as, quote, how willing would you be to make friends with someone described as having a mental health problem? These measures were the dependent variables, the outcome variables. Several mediating variables were also assessed, that is, variables that might mediate the relationship between engaging with the game and the stigma outcomes. This included a measure that assessed transportation into the story world, which was measured using a narrative engagement scale, and identification with Senua using a player identification scale. Both of these scales were taken from previous research, were validated, and shown to be reliable measures. The researchers also controlled for game difficulty and personal experience with mental health challenges and mental health education, with questions such as, quote, I have received some formal education regarding mental health, as these could have an effect on the outcomes. Results. As shown in Figure 1, playing the game as opposed to watching increased the sense of transportation, which then increased the sense of identification with Senua. Identification was then associated with a decreased desire for social distance. However, the same pattern did not hold for stereotyping. So this means that the researchers found an indirect path from gameplay to reduced social distance through transportation and identification. However, as I noted before, the path towards stereotyping was not significant. The researchers proposed one possible explanation for this, that even though participants identify with Senua and take on Senua's thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors through transportation, they may still stereotype their own self-concept. Because of this, the specific mechanisms by which stereotyping might be reduced still need to be explored. The researchers end this study by discussing both theoretical and practical implications for their findings. Theoretically, these findings provide a greater understanding of the role of media entertainment in stigma reduction, specifically within games. Practically, these findings illustrate that commercially available games can impact change even when it's not the developer's primary purpose. The power of science. My thoughts. I really like this study. Experimental studies are few and far between in game studies because they require, a lab, which requires funding and time and resources and people. So it's really great when one comes across the screen. I was going to say my table, but let's be honest, everything's on the screen. I think this study has wide-ranging practical implications and really does add to our understanding of how media can contribute to or reduce stigma related to mental health. The measures they all used were well validated, they were robust, and I really like the examination between playing and viewing and how that might differentially impact the outcomes. The researchers note in their limitations that participants only played the first 45 minutes of the game, and I agree with them that I'd really like to see how the results might change if they went through all of Senua's journey. This would make a great replication. Maybe then the effects would be strong enough to see an effect on stereotyping. Maybe. I'd also really love to see a replication with a less immersive game, something like Depression Quest, for instance, and see how robust those findings are. Can we see change through text-based games like Depression Quest in the same way we see change through fully immersive, beautiful games like Hellblade? Overall, it's a great study. It's well planned. I'm really looking forward to seeing where they're going next with it. And I think it's really exciting to see work using commercial games and how it can impact real social change, especially when it comes to stigma against mental health. If you want to read the study for yourself, I will link it below. It is in the Open Access Journal Frontiers in Psychology and the special issue on digital games and mental health. If you like this video and you want to see more, please like and subscribe. And until next time, be excellent to each other and always cite your sources.